I watched in stunned silence as 8 months of my life unfurled on the projection screen before me. Every slide contained my words, my research, my vision. Yet Imani stood at the front of the boardroom presenting it as her own creation. 3 weeks. She'd been at the company for just 3 weeks. My proposal for revitalizing the abandoned warehouse district, with its intricate sustainability metrics, community engagement frameworks, and economic forecasting models, had become the Imani Initiative, according to the header on each slide. As you can see, she continued with unwavering confidence, gesturing toward my meticulously crafted impact assessment matrix. This approach balances commercial interests with genuine community needs. The executives nodded appreciatively. I searched their faces for any flicker of recognition, any question about why someone who joined the firm 21 days ago had suddenly produced this comprehensive neighborhood transformation plan. There was nothing. The integration of green space with affordable housing creates multiple touchpoints for community ownership. Imani explained, using my exact words I'd refined through countless drafts at my kitchen table. At 3 a.m., my boss, Terrence, leaned forward, captivated. The board is going to absolutely love this direction. The way you've reimagined the warehouse district is revolutionary. I felt dizzy, my fingernails digging half-moons into my palms beneath the table. When the lights came up after the presentation, I forced myself to breathe normally, as applause filled the room. Any questions? Terrence asked, beaming at his new protege. My hand rose of its own accord. Audra? He acknowledged me with visible reluctance. I'm curious about the community stakeholder interviews, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. There were over 200 of them conducted. Did you personally speak with the neighborhood coalition leaders? For a fraction of a second, uncertainty crossed Imani's face before she recovered. I was inspired by preliminary research, of course. The groundwork was invaluable. Preliminary, I repeated quietly. Terrence quickly jumped in. Let's take any technical questions offline. The executive committee has another meeting in 5 minutes. The room emptied quickly, leaving me sitting alone until only Terrence and Imani remained near the doorway, speaking in hushed tones. I gathered my notebook and approached them. We need to discuss something, I said quietly. That entire presentation was based on your initial concepts, yes, Terrence interrupted, already defensive. But Imani has expanded them significantly. Her approach resonates better with stakeholders. Those were my exact models, my exact wording, even my, look. Prisha from HR appeared beside us, her expression perfectly calibrated between sympathy and finality. The decision's been made. Imani is just more dynamic, frankly. The board connects with her. They've already approved the budget with her as lead. My throat tightened. 8 months of work, countless site visits in freezing rain, community interviews conducted during evenings and weekends, all stolen with a flash drive and a winning smile. Fine, I said, finally, a strange calm settling over me. Keep it. The project's all yours. They visibly relaxed. They'd expected resistance, tears, anger. I walked to my desk, opened my drawer, and removed the small plant my sister had given me when I landed this job 2 years ago. I placed it in my tote bag alongside a framed photo of my grandmother and my favorite ceramic mug. Within 10 minutes, I had cleared my personal items and walked out the front door without looking back. Before I continue with what happened next, if you're finding this story resonates with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories about workplace justice and professional revenge. Leave a comment if you've ever had your work stolen. Trust me, what happens next will be worth the wait. My name is Audra, and before this catastrophe, I was a senior development strategist at an urban planning firm. People always described me as thorough, thoughtful, and tenacious, qualities that made me excellent at my job, but terrible at office politics. I preferred researching zoning regulations to attending happy hours, and I'd rather spend weekends walking through neighborhoods talking to residents than networking at industry events. This neighborhood revitalization project had become my obsession from the moment it landed on my desk. The warehouse district had been abandoned for decades, 12 square blocks of crumbling brick buildings, broken windows, and forgotten potential. But where others saw decay, I saw possibility. Affordable housing alongside creative workspaces, community gardens connecting neighbors, local businesses thriving in renovated storefronts. I began by literally walking every street, photographing buildings, talking to the few businesses still operating in the area's periphery. I attended community meetings at the local library, listening more than speaking. I met Lorna, who had lived in the neighborhood for 62 years and knew every family on her block. I got to know Darnell, who ran an unofficial community tool-sharing program from his garage. I spent evenings with Miro, who organized a youth chess club in the park despite the broken tables. These weren't just stakeholder interviews to me. These were relationships. I drank tea in living rooms. I attended birthday celebrations in community centers. I helped plant seedlings in guerrilla gardens sprouting between abandoned lots. For 8 months, I immersed myself in understanding not just the physical structures of the neighborhood, but its human architecture, the invisible connections between people that made this neglected corner of the city resilient, despite decades of disinvestment. My proposal reflected all of that research in its data and projections, but the heart of it, the human connections, and unwritten agreements, those remained in my head, in my conversations, in handshake promises made over coffee or while painting a community mural. Imani arrived at the firm with impeccable credentials and charisma that made everyone gravitate toward her immediately. I admired her confidence at first, even mentored her during her first 2 weeks. When she asked to see some of my current projects, just to understand the firm's approach, I happily shared digital files of my work in progress. 3 days later, she was in Terrence's office for over an hour, with the door closed. The next morning, I received a calendar invitation for the presentation that would end my time at the firm. As I drove home after clearing out my desk, I wasn't angry yet, just hollow, as if something essential had been scooped out of me. I had invested so much of myself in that project, imagining how it would transform not just the neighborhood but also my career. Now someone else would get credit for my vision, my research, my relationships. But by midnight, as I sat on my apartment floor surrounded by my meager office belongings, something shifted inside me. A clarity emerged through the fog of betrayal. I realized that Imani and Terrence had stolen my documents, my proposal, my slides, but they couldn't steal what wasn't written down. They had no idea that the success of this project depended on dozens of conversations that never made it into official reports. They didn't know which property owners were quietly blocking progress behind the scenes, or which historical elements residents would fight tooth and nail to preserve. They weren't aware of the specific promises I'd made to community leaders about affordable housing percentages, local hiring guarantees, and green space allocations. I hadn't documented these critical details because they were still evolving, still being negotiated. The project documents contained the what, but not the who or the how. Without those relationships and that contextual knowledge, the beautiful renderings and economic projections were just pretty fiction. I almost felt sorry for them. Almost. I spent the next week applying for new positions and fielding concerned calls from colleagues. Word had spread quickly about my departure, and the office rumor mill was churning with various versions of what happened. None of my former coworkers directly asked if Imani had stolen my work. They didn't need to. They knew. "You should fight this," urged my friend Zoe over lunch. "You have earlier drafts, time, stamped emails. You could prove it was your project." I shook my head. And then what? Force myself back into a company that allowed this to happen? Work for people who so clearly don't value me? "So, you're just going to let her get away with it?" Zoe looked incredulous. I smiled for the first time in days. "I'm not letting her get away with anything. I'm letting her walk directly into the consequences of not knowing what she doesn't know." The groundbreaking ceremony was scheduled for 6 weeks after my departure. I watched the company's social media posts as Imani's star rose. There she was shaking hands with the mayor. There she was being interviewed by the local business journal about her innovative approach to community-centered development. There she was standing proudly in front of the warehouse district, pointing toward the future she'd supposedly envisioned. I received an email invitation to the groundbreaking ceremony, a mass email sent to all community stakeholders they had on file. The irony wasn't lost on me. I decided to attend, but not as a participant. I needed to witness what was about to unfold. The day arrived with perfect weather, sunny, mild, ideal for the outdoor event they'd planned. A temporary stage had been erected in front of the largest warehouse, with chairs set up for various dignitaries. Behind the stage hung a massive rendering of the proposed development, my design now emblazoned with the company logo and Imani's name in the corner as lead architect. I positioned myself across the street, wearing sunglasses and a hat, just another face in the crowd gathering to witness the event. Local news crews set up their cameras as Terrence, Imani, and the mayor took their places on stage, smiling for the flashing cameras. "Today marks the beginning of a new chapter for our city," the mayor announced, his voice booming through speakers. a visionary approach to neighborhood revitalization that puts community first. Imani stepped forward to the microphone, exuding the same polished confidence she'd displayed in the boardroom. I'm thrilled to present this transformative vision for the warehouse district. Our approach centers the community at every step, ensuring this development serves the people who call this neighborhood home. I almost admired her performance. She believed her own narrative now. She gestured expansively toward the architectural renderings as she described her innovative community-centered approach, using my words, my research, my vision. We've incorporated substantial affordable housing, green space, and economic opportunities while preserving the historic character that makes this area special, she continued. From my position across the street, I noticed movement in the crowd. Several familiar faces were gathering near the front. Lorna with her bright headscarf, Darnell in his work jacket despite the warm day, Miro with his teenage chess club members. These weren't just random residents. These were the neighborhood's true power brokers, the unofficial leaders whose buy-in determined whether any project succeeded or failed. The mayor finished his remarks and opened the floor for a brief Q&A session. This wasn't standard protocol for groundbreaking ceremonies, but he prided himself on community engagement, a crucial mistake for Imani and Terrence. Lorna's hand shot up first, and the mayor recognized her immediately. She'd lived in his district for decades and never missed a town hall. You mentioned affordable housing, she said, her voice carrying clearly despite her 82 years. But where are the 60 units of senior housing at 30% below market rate that were promised for the Wilson building? I don't see them in these drawings. Imani blinked rapidly. We have affordable housing distributed throughout the development. That's not what we agreed to, Lorna interrupted firmly. We specifically discussed senior housing in the Wilson building because it's closest to the medical center and has elevator infrastructure already. You promised it in writing. I had indeed promised it, but in a handwritten note during a community meeting, not in the official proposal. Imani glanced desperately at Terrence, who stepped forward. We're still finalizing specific building allocations, he said smoothly. All community agreements will be honored. Before he finished speaking, Darnell raised his hand. The mayor, recognizing another community fixture, called on him. The job training center, Darnell said, was supposed to be operational before construction began on the residential units. That was the guarantee that local residents would have first access to construction jobs. Where's that in the timeline? Imani fumbled through her presentation materials. Our phased approach prioritizes. That's not what we agreed to, Darnell cut in. We have 30 young people who've completed pre-apprenticeship programs specifically for this project. Are you saying those jobs aren't happening? Miro stood next without being called on. And what about the community ownership model for the marketplace? We were promised 51% ownership stake for neighborhood residents with subsidized vendor stalls for local businesses. Imani's professional composure cracked. I'm not familiar with those specific details, but I assure you, who exactly have you been meeting with? Called another voice. Yasmin, who ran the neighborhood association, because it wasn't us. The mayor's smile had vanished entirely. He leaned over to whisper something to his aide, who nodded and stepped away, phone already at her ear. More hands rose. More questions followed. Each one referenced a specific conversation, a particular promise, a detailed agreement that appeared nowhere in the official documentation. With each question, Imani's confident facade crumbled further. Terrence attempted damage control, but his vague assurances only heightened the tension. This isn't what we discussed with Audra, Lorna said finally. Speaking the truth, everyone had been dancing around. A hush fell over the crowd. Camera crews swung toward the community members, sensing a story more interesting than a standard groundbreaking. Audra Parker was part of our early research team, Terrence said carefully. But this final vision is Imani's work. Then Imani should be able to tell us about the preservation agreement for the murals on the eastern buildings, challenged an artist from the back. Or the noise mitigation plan for construction near the elementary school. Or the community review board structure. The mayor stepped in, clearly recognizing the unfolding disaster. It seems we have some communication issues to resolve. Let's postpone the ceremonial groundbreaking until we can ensure all community agreements are properly documented and honored. News cameras captured every moment as the event dissolved into clusters of angry residents confronting flustered company representatives. I watched Imani standing alone on the stage, staring at her now useless presentation materials, the enormity of what she didn't know finally dawning on her. By evening, local news was reporting on the unexpected confrontation at what should have been a celebration. Community members raise serious concerns about warehouse district revitalization. Read the crawler beneath footage of Lorna questioning Imani. Within days, regional outlets picked up the story. Development project faces backlash over broken promises. The business journal that had profiled Imani now ran a piece titled Communication Breakdown: When Developers Fail to Engage Communities. I watched it all unfold from a distance, sending out job applications and taking interviews while the project imploded. 1 week after the disastrous groundbreaking, the City Council called for a formal review of the project approvals. The following week, an advocacy group filed a petition demanding community oversight of the development. Investors grew nervous. The mayor, facing re-election, publicly questioned whether the current development team understood the neighborhood's needs. The project that had been fast-tracked for approval was now mired in controversy and delays. I accepted a position with a smaller firm across town, one that specialized in genuine community-led development. My new boss valued my methodical approach and community connections. I began rebuilding my career, focusing on a different neighborhood with different challenges. Then, exactly 1 month after the failed groundbreaking, my phone rang with a number I recognized immediately. "Audra," Terrence said when I answered. His voice lacked its usual authoritative tone. "How are you?" "I'm well," I replied, watching through my new office window as rain streaked the glass. "How can I help you?" "Things have gotten complicated with the warehouse project." "Sounds like it," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "I saw the coverage about the community coalition demanding the permits be revoked." He sighed heavily. "It's worse than what's in the news. Investors are threatening to pull out. The mayor's office is distancing themselves. The project is falling apart. That's unfortunate. The relationships you built, the agreements you made. We need your help, Audra." I let the silence stretch between us, watching raindrops race down the window pane. "We're willing to bring you back," he continued, desperation evident in his voice, "with a substantial raise and proper credit for your work." "I'm not interested in coming back," I said calmly. "Name your price. Seriously. We can't move forward without you." "My consulting rate is triple my former salary," I said, "and I'll need full project control." The silence lasted 15 seconds before he spoke again. We can make that work. How soon can you start?" "I'm not available for 2 weeks." "And Terrence?" "I'll need everything in writing this time." After I hung up, I sat at my new desk, emotions swirling. Not triumph exactly, but vindication. They had taken my work, my ideas, my vision, but they couldn't take the relationships I'd built or the knowledge I'd accumulated. Those couldn't be stolen with a flash drive. The community hadn't revolted because they were loyal to me personally. They revolted because Imani and Terrence couldn't deliver on promises they didn't know existed. They had the blueprint, but not the foundation. The maps, but not the terrain. The what, but not the how. I hadn't orchestrated this outcome. I'd simply stepped aside and let reality take its course. The most effective revenge wasn't stealing something back. It was letting them keep what they'd taken and watching them discover its worthlessness without the critical pieces they never knew existed. The next morning, I received a formal consulting agreement from Terrence's assistant. The terms were even better than I'd demanded: triple my former salary, full creative control, and prominent credit on all materials. They were desperate. I took the document to my new boss, explaining the situation. "I'd like to help salvage this project for the community's sake," I told him. "But I don't want to leave the position I just started." He studied the agreement, then looked up with a thoughtful expression. "What if we approached this differently? Instead of you going back to them, what if our firm took over the project with you as lead?" "A partnership?" I asked, considering the possibility. "More of an acquisition," he said with a slight smile. "They need what we have: genuine community relationships and expertise. Let's offer to take the project off their hands entirely." I stared at him, a new possibility taking shape in my mind, one far better than merely consulting for my old firm. "They're desperate enough that they might agree." "Draft a proposal," he said. "Let's see if we can turn this into a win for everyone, especially the community." That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with a fresh legal pad, mapping out a strategy not just for rescuing the warehouse project, but for transforming it into something even better than my original vision. The community deserved nothing less. As I worked, my phone lit up with a news alert. Major developer faces potential lawsuit over warehouse district project. I allowed myself a small smile before returning to my notes. Sometimes the universe delivers justice in unexpected ways, and sometimes, when you're patient enough, You get to be the one holding the scales. 2 days later, I presented my proposal to Terrence and the project stakeholders at their offices. I chose to meet them on their territory. It gave them the illusion of control, while I held all the cards. "This is highly unusual," said Prisha from HR, frowning at the partnership agreement I'd placed on the table. "We wanted to bring you back as a consultant, not hand over the entire project. The situation has evolved beyond consulting," I replied calmly. "The community has lost faith in this firm's ability to deliver on promises made. My new company specializes in rebuilding exactly that kind of trust." Terrence leaned forward, his expression tight. "We're not prepared to simply give away a multi-million-dollar project." "You're not giving it away," I corrected him. "You're accepting a lifeline for a drowning initiative. Let's be clear about where things stand." I opened my laptop and pulled up the latest news coverage. 3 investor groups have publicly expressed concerns. The mayor is now calling for a reset of the entire approval process. The Neighborhood Coalition has filed for an emergency injunction to stop any preliminary site work. This project isn't just stalled, it's actively collapsing. Imani sat silently at the far end of the table. She hadn't made eye contact with me once. "Our proposal allows your firm to remain involved as a secondary partner," I continued. "You'll recoup most of your investment and maintain a presence in the completed development. The alternative is watching this project die a very public death." "And you benefit how exactly?" asked Terrence, suspicion evident in his tone. "My new firm establishes itself as capable of handling complex, high-profile projects. I repair relationships with a community I care deeply about. And yes, we make a healthy profit when the development succeeds, which it will, because we actually understand how to work with these stakeholders." The room fell silent as they processed the reality of their situation. "I need time to discuss this with our board," Terrence finally said. "Of course," I replied, gathering my materials. "You have until tomorrow at noon. After that, I'll need to inform my community contacts that we weren't able to reach an agreement." As I stood to leave, Imani finally spoke. "How did you do it? How did you turn them against us so quickly?" I paused at the door. "I didn't turn anyone against you, Imani. I simply wasn't there to translate when they started speaking a language you don't understand." The following morning, I received a call from Terrence, accepting our terms with minor modifications. By the end of the week, contracts were signed transferring primary control of the warehouse district revitalization to my new firm. The news coverage shifted dramatically. Fresh start for troubled warehouse project as new development team takes lead. My first official act was organizing a community town hall in the warehouse district itself. Unlike the ceremonial groundbreaking with its stage and dignitaries, this meeting happened in a partially renovated building with folding chairs and a simple projector. I invited everyone: residents, business owners, advocacy groups, city officials, and yes, representatives from my former firm, including Terrence and Imani. "Thank you all for coming," I began, standing before the packed room. "We're here to reset this process and ensure that everyone's voice is heard and respected. I want to acknowledge the frustration many of you have felt and commit to rebuilding trust through actions, not just words." For the next 2 hours, I facilitated a raw, honest conversation about what had gone wrong and how to move forward. Community members spoke directly to developers about broken promises. City officials addressed concerns about displacement and gentrification. Through it all, I guided the discussion toward concrete solutions and documented every agreement publicly on large sheets of paper taped to the walls. When Lorna stood to speak about the senior housing needs, I made sure Terrence and Imani were paying attention. "This is what community engagement actually looks like," I said quietly to them. "Not presentations and renderings, but relationships and commitments." By the end of the meeting, we had established a community oversight committee with real authority, revamped the project timeline to prioritize local needs, and created transparent accountability mechanisms. The tension in the room had transformed into cautious optimism. As people were leaving, Miro approached me. "You came back," he said simply. "I never really left," I replied. "This neighborhood matters too much." He nodded. "The other woman, your replacement, she visited my chess club once after you left, took pictures for social media, talked about featuring us in marketing materials, never asked our names. That won't happen again, I promised." "I know," he said. "That's why we all showed up at that groundbreaking. We knew something wasn't right when you disappeared and suddenly she was in charge. The timing was too convenient." I blinked in surprise. "So, you intentionally created that confrontation?" Miro smiled slightly. We may live in a neglected neighborhood, Audra, but we're not stupid. We recognize when someone steals another person's work. Lorna made sure everyone understood what was happening. We decided to wait for the perfect moment to ask questions they couldn't answer. I felt a rush of gratitude and humility. While I'd been planning my professional resurrection, the community had been executing their own form of justice on my behalf. Thank you, I said softly. No thanks needed. We protect our own. Over the next 3 months, the project transformed. With community leaders genuinely involved in decision-making, the plans evolved in unexpected and beautiful ways. The senior housing expanded to include intergenerational spaces. The job training center partnered with the high school to create dual enrollment opportunities. The community marketplace incorporated a seed library and teaching kitchen. My new firm's reputation soared as the warehouse project became a case study in community-centered development. We received inquiries from municipalities across the region wanting to replicate our approach. My career, which I'd feared was derailed permanently, instead catapulted forward. Through it all, Terrence and Imani remained involved as minor partners, attending meetings and watching from the sidelines as I led the project they'd tried to steal from me. Their presence was my one condition to the board. When we took over, I wanted them to witness every step of the transformation. 6 months after the failed groundbreaking, we held a new ceremony to mark the start of construction. This time, community members spoke alongside officials. This time, the renderings showed designs that had evolved through genuine collaboration. This time, when questions came from the audience, we had authentic answers. As we prepared to symbolically break ground, I handed ceremonial shovels to Lorna, Darnell, Miro, and other community leaders. I also, to everyone's surprise, called Terrence and Imani forward. This project has had a complicated journey, I said to the gathered crowd, but transformative work often does. Today, we recognize that this development isn't about any individual or company. It's about community vision and collective effort. I watched Imani's face as she reluctantly took her place beside the community leaders she'd once pretended to know. The contrast was stark. They stood confident and proud, while she looked uncomfortable and out of place. After the ceremony, as the crowd dispersed, Imani approached me. "I don't understand why you included us today," she said quietly, "after what we did to you." "Because this was never about you," I replied. "Or me. It's about something much bigger than either of us." "I would have destroyed you without a second thought," she admitted. "I know. That's the difference between us." I gathered my notes and turned to join a group of community members discussing the next day's planning meeting. "Audra," she called after me. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry." I paused but didn't turn back. "Prove it by actually listening to people next time, instead of just waiting for your turn to speak." That evening, I sat on the rooftop of one of the warehouses with Lorna and several other community elders, watching the sunset paint the old brick buildings in gold and pink. Construction equipment stood ready for the real work to begin the next morning. "You could have destroyed them completely," Lorna observed, sipping her tea. "Taken everything. Instead, you gave them a minor role." "Destroying them wouldn't help this neighborhood," I replied, "but transforming them might." She laughed softly, always thinking 10 steps ahead. "I learned that from you," I reminded her. We fell silent, watching darkness settle over the district. Tomorrow, the real transformation would begin, not just of buildings and streets, but of relationships and systems. My revenge wasn't in destroying Terrence and Imani's careers or publicly humiliating them, though I certainly could have. My revenge was in forcing them to witness real leadership from the sidelines, to see what they could never accomplish on their own, to understand that genuine success comes not from stealing credit, but from building trust. The most devastating revenge wasn't taking back what they stole. It was showing them how little they understood its true value. My phone buzzed with a text from my sister. "Saw the news coverage. You looked amazing. How does it feel to win so completely?" I typed back, "Like justice, but better." The Warehouse District project went on to become nationally recognized, featured in urban planning journals and sustainability conferences. Under our guidance, it transformed into something far more meaningful than my original vision, because we truly listened to the community rather than imposing ideas upon them. Terrence eventually left the original firm, his reputation diminished by the project's early failures. Imani remained, but her meteoric rise stalled. She was assigned to smaller, less visible projects where her lack of authentic community engagement skills wouldn't create public relations disasters. As for me, I established a new standard for development work that centered community knowledge and relationships. The victory wasn't in destroying careers or burning bridges, it was in fundamentally changing how business was done, with myself at the forefront of that change. Sometimes the most satisfying revenge isn't what you take away from those who wronged you, but what you build in spite of them. Something so magnificent that they're forced to stand in its shadow, knowing they could have been part of creating it if they'd chosen integrity over shortcuts. The warehouse district bloomed into a vibrant community hub where longtime residents could afford to stay, new businesses could thrive, and public spaces brought people together across differences. Each time I walked its streets, watching children play in parks that once stood empty and neighbors gathering in plazas that once held only broken glass, I felt a quiet vindication far sweeter than any dramatic confrontation. The greatest revenge wasn't in a single triumphant moment, but in the lasting legacy that would stand for generations after Terrence and Imani were forgotten. A neighborhood transformed not by theft and deception, but by patience, perseverance, and genuine partnership. If you've ever had your work stolen or been pushed aside for someone more dynamic, remember that true success can't be faked and relationships can't be stolen. Your knowledge, your connections, your integrity, these are your true power. Like this video if you've ever witnessed karma deliver justice in your professional life, and subscribe for more stories about overcoming workplace betrayal with intelligence rather than rage. Drop a comment about how you would have handled this situation. Would you have been as strategic, or would you have chosen a more direct form of revenge? The community you build here might just be your greatest resource when you face your own professional challenges.